We want to open this video by acknowledging the fact that a lot of people have asked about this one. Star Trek is now such a juggernaut and so many different iterations that we've been asked, when you feel daunted, where's the best place to start for those who don't necessarily want to start with The Cage? We are going to discuss that OG episode in this list, but we also acknowledge the fact that it's been 60 years since The Cage was created, and Star Trek, while still maintaining the lofty ideals that were put forward in that episode, has evolved so much since then. If somebody was totally ignorant of the franchise and watched The Cage alongside Season 3 of Star Trek Picard, they might well wonder, am I watching the same show? Now, many of us will be like, well, yeah, it's Star Trek. Of course, it was warp and everything. So, what we're going to do for this article is we're going to pick a few different entry points that could help people come into the franchise, even if it's somewhere a little along the way. These are the people who may not know about the Borg, may not know about the PAL rates, may not know about Captain Proton, if you can imagine such a thing. Someone fresh out the box. If you are squeaky clean and right off the assembly line, then my friend, we've got you. I'm Sean Ferrick for TrekCulture, and here are the 10 best entry points for Star Trek newcomers. Number 10, The Cage. So we're going to discuss The Cage first. It just seems like an obvious jumping off point. This was created back in 1964, and it owed an awful lot to existing and preceding sci-fi of the time. If you get a chance, if you haven't seen it already, watch the movie Forbidden Planet. You will see there's a lot of inspiration going on. While it owes an awful lot to the pulpy content of yesteryear, it remains a very strong episode in its own right. Captain Christopher Pike is an easy leading man in the form of Jeffrey Hunter. Now, I'm not going to lie to you, a lot of the dialogue has aged pretty poorly in the 60 years. But if you can accept the fact that it was created in a very different time, you will see that there is a lot to enjoy. I mentioned Jeffrey Hunter. Majel Barrett is fantastic as number one, and of course, who could ignore the instantly iconic Leonard Nimoy as Mr. Spock? The episode has of course been remastered for those who may struggle a tiny little bit with 60s production values, or, at least in the UK and Ireland, the original untouched pilot is available on Netflix if that's more your thing. But for fans of the classics, this episode has it all, even if it wasn't enough to majorly convince the network in the beginning, although it did convince them to let Roddenberry try again, which is how we got Where No Man Has Gone Before. The Cage is kind of like a pure, unrefined Star Trek. It's all there, and over the years, we've managed to just get it right down to a T. Number 9, Strange New Worlds. For those of you who are more comfortable with a more modern aesthetic, then Strange New Worlds is probably the best place to start for you. We're still following Captain Christopher Pike, but this time, Anson Mount plays the role. The joke being, this is the longest pilot-to-series order in television history. 1964 to 2022? Alright, yeah. Familiar characters from The Cage return, with Rebecca Romijn playing number 1 and Ethan Peck donning the Vulcan ears as Mr. Spock. The episode is designed in such a way that it does honour what came before, and it is quite effectively a follow-on from seasons 1 and 2 of Star Trek Discovery, but it's also very welcoming for new people to jump on board the franchise. The episode is full of strong performances, not least of which from Christina Chong as La'an Noonien Singh. It's got gorgeous visuals and a stunning musical score from composer Nami Meliamat. Of the recent Star Trek series, it's one of the best received. Its third series is due to air in 2025, and we know that the fourth season is going into production in just a couple of months. That means there's not that many episodes that you need to catch up on. So it is a little bit of an easier entry point than some of the others on this list, though no less compelling. Number 8, Balance of Terror. The original series was a masterpiece of its time, and so many of its stories have been retold in other forms and occasionally parodied. Balance of Terror has been quoted in so many other properties, so many different ways, that you might not have realised that's what they were parodying. Balance of Terror itself is something of an homage or remake, if you like, to an earlier movie, 1957's The Enemy Below. Now, the episode's director, Vincent McEveety, did say he'd never seen the film, but in the same breath he said, "Oh yeah, no, this is the same story." What makes this episode a great entry point is that it's got so much of what Star Trek would come to be known for. Faced with an enemy that has the face the same as one of their own, the Enterprise is then tasked with hunting down an invisible ship. Paranoia runs rampant throughout the crew on board, enough that it boils to the point where James T. Kirk utters his immortal line about leaving bigotry in your quarters. Just a reminder, this episode aired in 1966. Mark Lenard is so compelling as the Romulan commander that he would be invited back to Star Trek to play the role of Spock's father, Sarek, in subsequent episodes. The message of duty before dishonor, at least from the Romulans' point of view, is something that has become so much more present in modern political landscape that it makes Star Trek, particularly Balance of Terror, a strong entry point into the franchise. Number 7. Star Trek 2009. Star Trek, the film, reinvigorated the franchise when it hit cinemas in 2009. It had a bold new vision, it certainly had a budget, and when you look at how it did at the box office, it definitely engaged with its audience. The movie was tasked with the not inconsiderable role of recreating a beloved franchise, but also doing it in such a way that it would invite people who weren't necessarily massive Star Trek fans before to view the film. So technically it makes it absolutely tailor-made for a list like this. Including Leonard Nimoy in the cast was a very savvy choice as well to reach out to legacy fans who might have been a little bit worried in the new direction that the film was taking. This was a way of assuring them that, no, they weren't just going to brush aside everything that had come before. In many ways, it plays a greatest hits of Star Trek. You know, you got James T. Kirk, who can seemingly solve anything. Scotty is barely keeping everything together, but still does. And McCoy has more quips than he knows what to do with. All of that present in the original series and original series era movies, and yet done with such a tongue-in-cheek, knowing way that it's quite enjoyable to watch. Now, I'm not going to lie to you, it's far more of an action film than we had ever seen before in Star Trek. There's a lot of banging, there's a lot of booming, there's a lot of very sudden silence because there's no sound in space, something that this film did where all the previous ones didn't. So what you can say is all of the ingredients that make Star Trek are there, including the diplomacy. It's just louder. And one last note, the Romulan supernova is a fantastic starting point for modern Star Trek fans as well. Number 6, Duet. If you've been watching TrekCulture for a while now, you know that DS9 is my favourite series. So how was I going to pick an entry that wasn't just Emissary, start from the beginning, watch your way through, which in a way I still think you should, but I don't think it's the only place to begin, because I think there are other episodes in the first season that pretty much distill everything Deep Space Nine is into one episode, and I think Duet is one of those examples. Harris Yulin's performance as Eamon Maritza is bone-chilling to watch. Seeing this Cardassian's pain at how his people have treated another is something that sadly is very, very present today. But what it also does is it shows you the shades of grey of the villains of the piece, something Star Trek does very, very well. It offers a look at the true face of evil, and it doesn't judge who that face belongs to either. Now, to discuss the ending of Duet, those of you who've seen it know what I'm talking about, and those of you who haven't seen it, it's a doozy. It would spoil, but suffice to say that in one episode, you have the moral complexities that made Deep Space Nine in particular what it was, all distilled into 45 minutes. It is an incredible entry point for Star Trek. Number 5, Scorpion Part 1. Now, this may seem like a bit of an odd choice because Scorpion Part 1 is the final episode of the third season of Star Trek Voyager. You know, the temptation would be, well, why not just pick up from the first episode of the next season? Obvious answer, you're losing Part 1 of the episode. But if one were familiar with the Borg, this episode has it all. If one were unfamiliar with the Borg, this episode has it all. It was and remains one of the strongest season finales that Star Trek has offered, even if it does owe a lot to some of the episodes that came before. There's enough exposition here to help a new viewer through who the Borg are, what they stand for, and also that cold open is going to grab your attention whatever way you look at it. Even if you've never heard of a Borg cube or how powerful they are, seeing two get blown to smithereens within 40-odd seconds, you're going to want to watch past the opening credits. It's also an episode that's crucial for character development. Throughout both parts, Janeway and Chakotay, they sometimes butt heads, it's often frustrating, it's always engaging as you see their logic for this deal with the devil. There's enough here to invite you to watch more about the Borg and why the reactions are the way that they are. It's a good Rosetta Stone, if you like, for understanding one of the greatest villains in Star Trek history. Who are the Borg? What do they mean to Star Trek? And why is it such a big deal that they get defeated here? Number 4. Star Trek IV: The Voyage Home. Oftentimes a fish-out-of-water story is a reward for long-time viewers. You get to see your familiar characters in a different setting, you can spice it up a little bit. It's sort of a silly romp. And in fairness, Star Trek IV, the one with the whales, is definitely a silly romp. The film is packed with quotable moments. There is an undercurrent of humour that runs through the whole thing. There's gifts for Legacy Trek fans. Grace Lewitney and Majel Barrett both have cameos. But if one were to just take this as a standalone piece of 1980s sci-fi, it works on its own 2 feet. Now, of course, we don't want it just to be standalone. That's sort of the point of this list. We want you to keep watching. Star Trek IV hooks the viewer with its light tone. Now, it lacks the heavy message of Star Trek II or the campy tone of Star Trek V, and invites you to just enjoy a time travel story that sends spacemen and women from the 23rd century back to the 1980s San Francisco. Honestly, if the scene with the truck doesn't hook you, we worry for you. I'm sorry. Number 3. Yesterday's Enterprise. This 3rd season episode of The Next Generation manages to balance the old and the new very, very well. It gives you just enough to go on. Tasha was dead, Enterprise is old, oh look, new uniforms. But it does so without bashing anyone over the head with it. The romance element is simple enough and the performances take everything over. Whoopi Goldberg is fantastic as Guinan, and Denise Crosby probably gives the pinnacle version of Yar, even if a new viewer might not have seen anything previously. The episode was a long time in gestating, but it works without too much of a preamble. The darker setting suits the fact that the characters are thrown into, they're doing something different, as is the viewer who is coming in for the first time. Everyone's sort of learning on the fly. All of this is explained without losing the momentum of the story. It's a classic for a reason. The first 2 seasons of The Next Generation are often unfairly maligned. The 2nd season is the vastly superior effort overall, but if one were to start there, they would lose all of Denise Crosby's work as Tasha Yar from the 1st season. Starting with Yesterday's Enterprise means you get that full crew in that one episode, sans Pulaski, which will mean nothing to a new viewer, but it also means that you skip some of the rougher depictions of the 1st season. It may be an alternate universe episode, but it does enough to hook a viewer in, get them to engage, and enjoy prune juice along with the rest of us. Number 2. Brother. Star Trek Discovery's 2nd season was the first of a series of soft reboots that the show went through its lifetime. The 1st season was quite dark in tone, where the 2nd was overall much lighter. The opening episode sees the crew of Discovery deal with the arrival of the Enterprise, and while those in the know do an awful lot of knowing looks at each other, there's enough on show here that you don't have to have seen what came before. Tig Notaro joins as Jet Reno, and through her we get not only a little bit of exposition about the devastating Klingon War that had happened the previous year, but also a seriously needed injection of humour. You can see the camaraderie between the cast coming out. Doug Jones and Sonika Martin-Green work so well together on screen here. We also get introduced to Anson Mount as Pike, who is so enjoyable throughout this hour. There's enough of a mystery to grab viewers' attentions, and Pike delivers just enough exposition to sort of set the scene for the season. Burnham's voiceover gives a little bit more backstory, with everything combining together to make, if not the pilot episode of Discovery, then certainly an amazing jumping off point for the show. Number 1, Lost and Found. For the new viewer, there really is no better place to start than the opening episode of Star Trek Prodigy. The show was designed as a place for those who had never seen a frame of the franchise before, but also rewarding those who had seen the 60 years of history that went into making it. It manages to create a mystery that is intriguing, a little bit frightening, and more than satisfying when the protostar is revealed. It is perhaps best to go into Prodigy without too much worrying about the absolute cluster that went on behind the scenes of the show was on, then it was off, then it was cancelled, then it was on streaming, then it was off streaming, and now it's on Netflix. What I will say is that, suffice to say, it's a show that has weathered adversity. But more importantly than that, it's a show that delivers on its promise to bring new, younger viewers into the franchise. All of the ingredients of Star Trek are there, whether you know it as a viewer or not. You have mystery. You have new characters who are engaging. You have gorgeous visuals that are as beautiful as any piece of art that's available out there at the moment. All of this combines together to become a stunning piece of media that is light enough to pick up with no effort. Star Trek Prodigy was designed to bring new people into the final frontier. And I can promise you this, if you pick up with Lost and Found, you will be boldly going in no time whatsoever. Thank you very much, folks. We really hope you enjoyed this list. As I say, it's been one of our more requested ones, so we hope you enjoyed it. I have been Sean for TrekCulture. You can follow me at Sean Ferrick on the various socials. Make sure that you're following TrekCulture for more lists like this. Thank you. Please make sure that you subscribe. It does make all the difference when you do. So thank you so much. Until I see you again, live long and prosper. I'm pretty sure you know that one. And I'll chat to you soon. Thanks a million.